Good morning, everyone in StockTwits Nation. It is Wednesday, May 28th, NVIDIA Day, and we have a special guest with us to cover everything that's going down, a familiar face on StockTwits Trends with Friends, Michael Parekh. Michael, welcome. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. Hello from Houston.
Hello, and of course, we've got the always lovely Shay Boloor. Michael is a longtime tech investor, if you haven't seen him on the other show, former GS partner, one of the earliest analysts covering the internet. So the OG, and now he has a popular Substack called Reset to Zero, which you should all definitely check out. Guys, big day today. First, I'm gonna do a quick update of what happened yesterday in the markets, and then we're gonna go all in on Nvidia, Jensen, everything that's going down. Markets came out swinging yesterday, though. The S&P closed up 2%. The Dow climbed nearly 1.8%, and the NASDAQ rallied 2.5%. That was, of course, on news that tariffs were going to be pushed back to June 9th, which is also the day GameStop reports earnings. I'm sure those things have nothing to do with one another. We also got a better than expected consumer confidence report. And so we were looking good yesterday, and now we're sort of in a holding pattern heading into the open today. And of course, the big story is Nvidia. I'm going to kick it off with you, Michael. What are the top 2-3 things you're looking for in this readout?
I think, look, the numbers expectation, fairly understood in terms of the revenue numbers in the 40s, the gross margin expectations in the low 70s. They may be a couple of hiccups in terms of what the margins end up being because of some of the charges they've had to take, et cetera, because of the China drama. But overall, I think the numbers themselves, the market should be able to see through this. The place that is of most concern is the thing that NVIDIA, especially since the last couple of quarters, they do not control historically, which is what the administration does in terms of tariffs with China. That is the single largest overhang issue for the company. China has been a 15-20% plus market for them with tens of billions of dollars. Jensen was at his developer conference in Computex about a week ago, and he talked about how China literally is a market that's the second biggest market for AI infrastructure on the planet, and they're being shut out of it. It's worth $50 billion a year, and they're going from having 95% share to less than 5% because of the curbs started with the Biden administration, potentially continued with the Trump administration, the AI diffusion rules, et cetera. So that's the big overhang, political. In terms of the numbers this quarter, et cetera, they should be okay. Stock is 10% from its highs. If we didn't have the China overhang issues, we would have been at a much different level. So that's the big unknown issue.
Yeah, it feels like forever ago they announced that $5.5 billion write-down, but it wasn't that long ago. And that was, of course, the biggest write-down in the history of the chip industry. And then following that, though, we had a lot of deal-making in Saudi Arabia, and they saw some benefit from that. Shay, what are you looking to see today? Are there any particular metrics that you have your eye on the most, or are you generally interested in the tone and sentiment of Jensen Huang?
Well, to go, real quick on some color on what Michael was saying, it's unfortunate NVIDIA is being used as a political pawn in this cold compute war, but we should not let this narrative FUD dilute the absolute reality that NVIDIA is the kingpin of this new digital economy that's just getting started. AI is transforming everything from chips to cloud to healthcare, and NVIDIA sits at the center of them all. So I do think that I'm actually not a fan of what the US is doing right now with China on weaponizing compute, because you don't win the AI race by rationing compute like it's oil in the 70s, for example. Like, you win it by unleashing it fast at scale and with trusted allies. But if we bog all our allies down with licensing paperwork while Beijing offers turnkey AI infrastructure solutions, we're going to be screwed, and we're not going to win the AI race. So I think there's something that has to give a bit. But to go off of like this deal tour that NVIDIA is going down in recent weeks, like they kind of have to. Like I said, like they're being used as a political pawn. There's nothing they can do to control that narrative. It's essentially the higher ups are doing it for them, that they have to sit and take it. But again, domestically, AI has really taken off. Internationally, it's like the US back in 2017. Like it really hasn't gone to the same point that we are at domestically. And I think that Nvidia has a massive runway internationally. And if they can't do much domestically, they're gonna go across the pond and essentially get as many deal flow as possible, because like they have the bread and butter AI solution out there that really the world is their TAM, excluding China. And if 15% of their revenue, which is what China's allocation is in the total revenue, is at risk, they really need to emphasize the other nations to scale up, because it feels like the inevitability is China's going to have their own solution, and the U.S. and its allies are going to have this the other solution, aka Nvidia. That's just usually how things go. So in order to off-scale that 15%, they really need to start pushing internationally. So that's what Jensen's kind of doing right now.
And the Trump administration did help them secure clearance on the paperwork, as you know, Shay, in the Middle East. The Biden rules were lifted, and Jensen now has theoretically an order book of 1 million Blackwells in between Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the next 2 or 3 years. You know, I grew up in the Middle East. I grew up in Kuwait. You know, the reason I'm saying that is those guys are also deal makers, very tactical, etc. They know the value of the announcement, but oftentimes what they announce takes much longer than we think to happen. So from a quarterly NVIDIA earnings point of view, we can't count on the revenues as well as we could count on the revenues from China if that market was still open. But I'd rather have it than not have it. So, and then to your point, political pawn, I would go further. Nvidia and Apple are the political piñatas. There are two biggest $3 trillion companies, and Trump he knows how to manage the news cycle. He may or may not know what the strategic imperatives for the US. What he cares is about the day to day. He loves to put out a number, anchor something high. We're going to put 145% tariffs on China, take it down to 30%. Everyone is relieved. Everyone says, oh, 30% is awesome. But we forget 30% is higher than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the 1930s. That was less than 20%. Before all this, 2 or 3 years ago, our global tariffs were 2%. So my point is, you know, today, the Wall Street Journal, the big article, tariffs may not be an issue. The market has lost it, in my mind. 20, 30% tariffs are untenable. If that contains for more than 2 or 3 quarters, this market is done for. I don't care if it's Nvidia, Apple, etc. Is my view, because it's a recession. You can't, people, there's no transactions, there's no certainty, you can't make anything. That aside, where the market is hoping that Trump basically is playing his tactical news of the day, you know, he puts 25% tariffs on iPhones and he'll take it down to 2%, so the Apple will go up and down like a piñata. Same thing that's going on with Nvidia. And so my point is, for the CEOs like Jensen, for Tim Cook, they have to live with this new reality that they don't control this part. This is the stuff that they don't know. They have to manage their ships through it. In the meantime, Jensen is doing extraordinary things. He's, you know, they were curbed with the H20 chip, which was the dumbed down graphic card for China. Well, the administration says that you can't even send those. So now they've literally scrambled and created $6,500 chips that are a totally different architecture for China. Who knows if that'll take traction. The Chinese, and Shay, you and I talked about it offline, the biggest risk for NVIDIA within this China fight is CUDA. This is their open source software, it's free, but the millions of developers who give NVIDIA 90% market share in AI chips, they all use this CUDA software to do AI things across every industry on the planet. CUDA is not going to be duplicated in, you know, at least for 5 or 10 years. However, if you give China no choice and say, you guys don't have our technology, they've given Huawei the ability to build Ascend chips. There are other chips that are coming. SMIC is competing with TSMC on the fabs. In 5 years, they will have CUDA alternatives for their chips, and those chips will be cheaper, and they will sell them to the overseas markets. And that's what Jensen's afraid of. And he said so 2 weeks ago. So the quarter is going to be fine. The longer term issues are how this China stuff settles out, not just from entry and access to the Chinese market, but how much we prod the Chinese to create alternatives that, again, basically blows up in the face. And the last thing, if I may mention, is just all that's going on the foreign student side and Harvard and so on is also impacting China. Jensen has specifically said no more than 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks, to give people a hint, 50% of the world's AI researchers, and especially in the semi space, are Chinese. You look at our top semiconductor companies, CEO of AMD, Chinese American, just like Jensen. Broadcom, same thing. Chinese Americans, we've basically, as of yesterday, told every foreign student in the world, we have 1 million foreign students in this country, half of them are from India and China. Oh, we're going to check your social media. Basically, we are saying, no, you're not welcome, Matt. Education is the biggest welcome. I was a foreign student, so I can feel this. I came here at 17, so I really feel this. And my point is, if we block the next 2 or 3 generations from coming to America, our universities, and learn how to be semiconductor experts and so on, half of them, in the current world, stay here and join Nvidia, et cetera. But now we're going to force all of them to go to Canada, Europe, wherever. And that is also a big thing that we ought to keep in mind, because the biggest opportunity for AI is that the technologies are barely being invented. We need a whole generation of talent to create this, and we don't have enough people in America, even if we wanted to do all ourselves with 330 million. So I wanted to put in the education piece, because Jensen is very, very focused on that. He's talking about that. He's extraordinarily sensitive about this beyond the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's a long-term risk. I think you brought up a lot of points. You brought up something I was thinking about, which is if we create a scenario in which we're forcing them to innovate because we're taking something away. I think about, like, in World War II, the US, we changed all our factories. We you will figure out how to get something done if it's like a existential crisis. And it's like, are we not teeing up the perfect opportunity? And then long-term, dissuading people from coming to the US. And I think, but you're like, how much sway does Jensen Huang have? He's making comments, but do you think this resonates at all? Or do you think for this administration, it is a purely like, they have it out for Harvard for whatever reason? They're not going to back down from that, even if it counters their long-term goal of having AI dominance.
Great question, Katie. They don't have it out for Harvard or anything. This is just day-to-day political. These are things to use to drive the news cycle. It's got nothing to do with Harvard. It's got nothing to do with China. There's no geopolitical security issues with China. Our government can handle security issues with this stuff. This is all politics, because it helps get votes for this and that and the other. That's all. We have to keep that in mind. And as people who talk about these things in the public, et cetera, we have to realize that there is a bigger agenda in this kabuki theater that's going on. And so we spend so much cycle debating the merits, pros and cons, but we forget that what's happening is they're using these things as a way to put a boogeyman flag and say, Harvard is terrible, foreign students are terrible, migrants are terrible, education is terrible, NIH grants are terrible, semiconductors. The internet and AI would not have happened if we didn't have government research grants. I mean, Mark Andreessen literally says in his book that if he didn't have access to the 4 supercomputers, one of them at his university, he would have never invented the Netscape browser, which would not have gone public in '95 when I was heading up Goldman Internet Research. And we would not have had the ChatGPT moment in the '90s that start within. That was literally down to one senator's vote, Al Gore, that funded those 4 supercomputers. We would not have self-driving cars if it hadn't been for DARPA doing a race. What I'm trying to say is the government research and government accommodation of foreign students, 1 million every year, that is what makes one of the core things that makes America amazing and exceptional. And we need to be mindful of that. The current administration understands all this. They've got some of the smartest people working for them. David Sachs, Sri Ram, who heads up the AI. I've known these people for decades. They're amazing. My point is, they're They know policy-wise what should be done and not done. They understand the intricacies. It's just that their hands are tied because of the broader politics that are being played. Thank you.
Yeah. Shay, I'll let you get in there because, I mean, these are long-term risks that Michael's laying out, especially on the talent front. You're long on NVIDIA. Does it worry you at all that some of these policies might not reverse, and what he's laying out could happen, where we have top talent going to Europe or Canada, elsewhere, we fall behind, 10, 20 years down the line?
Definitely a risk. I absolutely do think that it's hard to decipher who's top talent, who's not, and that's the issue on like trying to find layers of immigrants coming to the nation, on seeing like who's worth staying. Like it's too subjective, it's too difficult. So that is an absolute risk. However, like I do think half glass full of it is AI agents are going to be changing everything in the future. You don't know how much FTEs you need on like talent wise for innovation, because you really, the rooms of 10 talented people, you maybe only need 4 now, and have those 4 just create incredible AI agents to replicate the missing 6, for example. So yeah, Michael?
Sure, I would just say this business of, governing talent and welcoming the best and meritocracy, I'm all for that. The problem is it's impossible. In a world of 8 billion people, we don't know who's going to turn up to be the next Jensen Huang. Look at Jensen Huang's history. He was one of 2 sons. Literally, the parents could not come with the kids. They sent the kids to live with distant relatives. They sent him to a school in the South. He learned how to clean bathrooms and stuff because he did what he had to do. There was nothing in his resume that would have said this immigrant is going to basically create a $3 trillion company in 20 years. That science, even with the world's best AI supercomputers, we cannot figure that out. What we can do is welcome people and then allow them to flourish in our ecosystem. Our country assimilates people faster than any country on the planet. I cannot today, if I was 23, go to China and become Chinese in 30 years. I cannot, because I got to learn Mandarin. The culture, they're not welcoming of me. Masa-san of Japan tells you today, he's the richest man, one of the richest men in Japan, but he was of Korean birth. He's still viewed as a gaijin in Japan. America embraces over time. We make short-term things against migrants, but this business of selecting the best immigrants, it's basically an impossible task. It's like forecasting the weather 3 months from now. Not physically possible. It's the quantum mechanics math is impossible. So I just wanted to highlight that what we can do is what we have been doing, which is all the policies, just welcoming the values, etc. And then we don't hope for the best. We know it works out because when they come into our ecosystem, they thrive. The Darwinism of American markets, etc., creates the cream to the top. The reason 50% of Chinese researchers of AI researchers are Chinese happens to be because they all flourished here. They came to the US and half of them ended up being the heads of some of the biggest semiconductor companies on the planet. And by the way, the innovations in the last 2, 3, 4 years on AI coming out of Chinese companies, DeepSeek, Manus, etc. In a different world, most of those companies would have been bought by US companies and all of those founders would have been here already. But they're not because of what's going on.
I mean, yeah, that also brings up a great point of exceptionalism, American exceptionalism. So I think that narrative, will take a long time to phase out, because I think it's an absolute reality. Like the 5-year-old in China, for example, or Japan, or wherever nation, Middle East, like they know America. The dream is to make it there. So I think that's going to take decades to phase out.
And all of the rich people in China, they want to send their kids here. Xi Jinping's daughter went to Harvard. Most people don't know this because she was under an assumed name. Guess what? Her life here, she's more pro-American than her dad will ever be. Okay, I don't know her, but I'm just saying, the 25% of Harvard students, MBA students are foreign. 90% of those are the leaders of the richest families in the world. Okay, these are the people who Trump would love to have at Mar-a-Lago, their families, because he would love to build Trump properties in all their countries. I'm telling you, we have the best of the best here. and we're just kicking them out. We're giving them uncertainty that, oh, if you're at Harvard, we may revoke your visa. And what's happening? Hong Kong said, oh, come back. If you're a Harvard student, you come back. Europe, EU just said half a 500 billion euros just as a starting point. Any American researcher on any field, come to whatever grant you had, we'll double it. Come today, visa stamped, done. This is happening today. The world understands what the battle is for the talent. Our country does too, but we're using this for political short-term, Wordle, for Trump, we all play Wordle every day. He plays what tariff number can I use every day? What thing I can do on which university, because it gets him points. This is not politics. I'm not talking politics. I'm talking the well-being of the United States, the thing that we all care about, because that translates into the markets, right? Our the two companies we're talking about, Nvidia and Apple, they're bigger than the market caps of most of the global stock markets in the world. I mean, that is why this is important. That's what we're talking about. The quarter, it just goes, there's a direct line from here to there. And we can't lose sight of that. Thank you.
I want to pivot to product roadmap, but one thing you said, Michael, I just want to clarify, because it is an interesting debate, right? Because you say some of the people who study here go back, and that's what the administration loves to say. We're training them up and they're going back, but you're basically saying, even if half go back, half stay, that's better than no one being here. Is that what you're saying?
It's not only that. I mean, I'll give you, everyone knows TSMC. Besides, if we didn't have Nvidia, the world would not have the world we have in AI. But more importantly, if we didn't have TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, which makes 98% of the chips, everything that goes into every electronics, not just the iPhones and the AI chips, the guy who founded TSMC was the number 2 runner-up for Texas Instruments CEO in the United States. He stayed here. He was going to have a career here. TSMC could have been here, but he didn't get the top job. And Taiwan, this is 24, you can look up the history, said, oh, come over to Taiwan. You were born in Taiwan. Come back to your home country, and we'll give you the funding, etc. And the rest is history. My point is that in an ideal world, if we were doing the opposite of what we're doing today, we would have not just 50%, we would have 80, 90% of the global talent to continue the innovation and the creativity and the product stuff that we're doing. And we're worried about iPhones. Guess what? The entire Apple, they only have 20-25% of the global smartphone market in units, but they have 80 to 85% of the profits of the smartphone market. It's not Samsung, it's not TSMC, it's not anything that's built, or the iPhones that are built in China. Who cares? Because we don't have the people. Apple has hired over 33 million people to build every iPhone that we've had since 2007. We don't have 33 million people in America. That's 10% of our country, 330 million. We physically don't have the people. And no, the robots and the automation will not make the iPhones. I can tell you why, because technically it cannot be done the way these things are done. The robots are not good enough yet. It won't be for another 10 to 20 years, despite what anyone tells you. So we are in a world, whether we like it or not, where it's global. We should give our companies, large, medium, and small, the ability to make anything they want, source things wherever, almost 0% tariffs, make it, sell it, and get market share, and get the market share in those high margin stuff, which is software and services. That's why they get 80% of the profit margins in smartphones around the world. And we're now saying, oh, we're going to make you, if this 25% goes through, the iPhone in the US would be $3,500. Guess what? There is no smartphone market. We're in a different world. And that is not in our best interest. It's not best interest for us as investors, and definitely not as citizens.
Yeah, we can get back over to Apple, because Shay and I have been loving talking about them lately. But I want to quickly pivot back to, obviously, NVIDIA sits at the center of this ecosystem, increasingly so. And Shay, you've talked about this, how they're sort of becoming this layer within everything. And so I'm curious if you could articulate the hardware, software sort of dynamic that you've been laying out recently about them, and also what, if NVIDIA does well, who benefits? What does that value chain look like? And then I want to kick it over to you, Michael, for a similar question, because I know you also have opinions.
Yeah, I mean, first off, like Nvidia is not a hardware company. I roll my eyes so hard when people just call them a hardware company. It's like such a misleading statement. Like, so that's why their earnings today is more of a litmus test for the entire AI economy. Yes, they're guiding to, I think it was 43 billion, which is I think it's like 65 or 70% year over year growth, and this is after growing triple digits last year. So like it's unheard of momentum. But I do think that the today's print isn't about the numbers, it's the signal about the future, because again, they're the kingpin of the new digital economy, and they have it's such a spiderweb effect that if they're struggling, everyone in that space is going to be struggling down the line. It just starts with Nvidia, and you get a lot of clarity and pre-reads from them. So to go off of like who benefits a lot from Nvidia, I think Broadcom is often overlooked. So if you think about Nvidia as a GPU engine or AI engine, Broadcom is the glue holding all the hyperscaler AI infrastructure together. Another one is Michael mentioned TSM. Like if Nvidia is shipping at scale, TSM is printing at scale. Like every Blackwell GPU comes off of their line. So a strong guidance from Nvidia is effectively a forward demand signal for TSM's most advanced nodes. And to go off of again, why Nvidia is not a hardware company, I know like this is the only part that Michael and I probably disagree on, where like it's CUDA. I think I've heard it numerous times before, like from Broadcom and AMD, like they both build chips, but they can't disrupt Nvidia because of CUDA. And when hyperscalers have been trying for a while now to build these in-house chips with these XPU architecture, like I do think it's the same story. The CUDA mode is too deep. So like I have a hard time believing that Huawei is under sanctions, especially that maybe not in the near term, but like in 5 to 10 years, like they're going to create a similar replicated product when they don't have access to the world's most advanced tooling. They aren't going to replicate they're going to try to replicate not just the silicon, but also the developer ecosystem that took Nvidia 20 years and billions of dollars to build. So like all the hyperscalers weren't able to do it. Tesla, Apple, and Oracle tried to build their own AI hardware stack and couldn't do it. So none have been able to replace CUDA at the developer level. So I don't think that the East is going to replicate a similar product, but I could be wrong again. But that's just my take on that. And regarding NVLink as well, like that's why CUDA is a software component that makes all their clients stay into their ecosystem and pay up for that pricey hardware. But NVLink is the high speed interconnect that links all the GPUs and like the custom chips into a shared memory environment. That is a massive secondary moat that they have. They announced just last week in Compute X that they're going to open source this. They're going to broaden out the use of it for the hyperscalers, because why are they doing that? Why are they taking down the wall for NVLink? It's because this narrative that all these hyperscalers are creating their own custom silicon chips, they want to get ahead of that. It's like, fine. Like Nvidia's essentially, or Jensen was essentially telling everyone, you don't need to go all in on Nvidia hardware, but you do need the Nvidia infrastructure to make it all work. So I don't care if you think that Nvidia doesn't own the AI train anymore. Guess what? We own the rails. So however many trains that you want to build for AI, you're going to have to build it on top of our AI rails. That's essentially what he's indicating, and that's why it's such an ecosystem now. But I'm curious on what Michael thinks about NVIDIA as well, and also any kind of feedback I had on what I just said.
No, all of those points were excellent. Let me start with your third point, which is CUDA, because that's a near and dear. We are in violent agreement, Shay, about CUDA in the US. I'm not worried about competition from any of the other AMD and other companies on open source software that support AI chips from AMD and others. I think it's a long-term 5 to 10 year game. The only reason I give more credence to CUDA alternatives, which is this open source AI framework that developers use to build things happening in China, is only if we give them no access to our chips, which we're doing up and down the line. It's not just Huawei, it's hundreds of companies in China that are all going to create open source versions, and they'll be different. What China is doing is what the US companies did 30 years ago, because we took Goldman Sachs, we took Microsoft public in 86, we took Dell public in 88. The reason I'm saying this is there were not geopolitical constraints. There were technical constraints about how much memory you had to build stuff. China is their engineers are being forced to create everything they need for AI with the most constraints in terms of the chips, the memory, etc. The way they can compensate for it is energy. AI needs energy, to do the compute. China has more energy than us by 3 to 4 times. They're building 30 nuclear plants in the next 6 to 7 years. Why is that important? That is dozens of gigawatts of energy. We need, gigawatt data centers. We're lucky if we do one, even with the administration's loosening of the nuclear. What I'm saying is they can throw so much energy, they can create chips that are much more lower power than, like, hugely, but take many more of them and do essentially the same thing. That's what DeepSeek did. They created their software innovations with the constraints. We are forcing a generation of millions of developers, not just Huawei, every small and medium, large company in China, to create this stuff new. They'll create their own version of open source software frameworks to do this. And they'll do it faster because they won't have access to our stuff. If we gave them access to our stuff, they won't do that. They'll compete on different grounds. That is my point. So that's the CUDA thing. I agree with you. In the US, I'm not worried about CUDA competition to NVIDIA. NVIDIA is fine. But this is what Jensen's worried about and he's talking about. The second point I just want to say, to Katie, your point, which are the companies? NVIDIA by itself is not they're right, they don't make all the hardware, but they assemble it all. This accelerated computing AI factories, they're like the lead aircraft carrier group, and there are hundreds of ships. You got Dell, you got all of these semiconductor companies. Everyone's creating all the pieces that go into the data centers around NVIDIA's equipment. And that is where NVIDIA benefits. So besides Broadcom, I couldn't agree more, because their top 5 customers are all using Broadcom to create competing chips to NVIDIA. But there's Qualcomm, there's Micron, even Intel has a shot with their foundry. Overseas, HBM, high bandwidth memory, is the big next constraint besides GPUs. And that's, SK Hynix and all of those other companies. So NVIDIA is the quarterback for all of that. And because all of their data centers and DGX gets assembled around that is where they get to capture more of the margin than everybody else. And you mentioned NVLink. I love NVLink. They just announced NV Fusion, which at Computex in Taiwan, which is a more flexible way for customers and developers to mix and match all the pieces from different companies, but use NVIDIA technology at the core to essentially continue NVIDIA's dominance. And you mentioned Rubin, which is the next architecture after Blackwell, and the one after that is Feynman. Jensen goes out of his way to draw a more roadmap 3 to 5 years with more transparency than any technology company I've followed in 30 years. And the reason he's doing it is because he knows he's leading not one carrier group, but 11 carrier groups, and everyone has to be sailing in the same direction. And this is why he's doing this. And right now, the only major cloud in his horizon is China, because China was part of his carrier group. All the companies in China were creating all the components that were going to be working with NVIDIA equipment and so on. He had it all. And we just gave that whole piece on a platter to the Chinese government. And this business of this AI race, we basically, if we continue this for the next 2 years, we've lost the AI race. And I don't like the characterization of a race, because races are finite. This is an infinite game. This thing is going to be, our grandkids are going to be innovating around AI in 20 or 30 years. This race does not end, but we gave them a huge advantage of the next few laps. And that is the thing that we need to point out. And that's what NVIDIA, who's not political, NVIDIA CEO, Jensen, he is less political than anybody else. He focuses on his own business. So 33 years, he's orchestrated, executed, brilliant path. He did CUDA. For 10 years, he funded it in hundreds of millions. Everyone called him a fool, lost a lot of money. The stock was in the tank. I remember, because I was a shareholder for a very long time. But now he's reaping the rewards. He's got a clearer roadmap than any tech CEO I've ever seen. And for investors, this is like buying Microsoft in the 80s and 90s. Just keep and forget it. And it's not a stock recommendation. But the China piece is the big risk, and that's the reason I highlight both of these points. But your points, Shay, was terrific. I think CUDA is okay. You're right. I don't see U.S. competition on that front.
Yeah, I want to keep you for a couple more minutes, Michael. We've been talking kind of at this level, and both of you guys are alluding to this ecosystem around the company, the fleet of ships. If you're an investor and you're trying to assess, the value chain, all of these different players, we probably listed dozens of companies today. Not saying like naming names of like who you'd invest in, but like how is an individual investor supposed to make sense of all this? And what would like your advice be to someone who's like, hey, I'm buying into this narrative. You're telling me I understand where this is going, but there's hundreds of companies building in this space, and I'm trying to make a decision. I'll start with you, Shay, and then I'll go to Michael.
I mean, it's a great question. I think it's becoming more of a weighted component of every investing decision in today's environment, because you guys hear me say this all the time, being a dead horse, but the AI tsunami is coming, and it's coming for everyone, and nobody's really safe. AKA my Apple thesis that I think is potential the next Intel, for example. Like, we won't get into that too much. We got into it yesterday, but I think a lot of the listeners, you need to ask yourself, how do I decide which companies to research and what triggers me to dig deeper? Because I think we're in the early innings of a new digital economy, one defined by AI saturation, geopolitical fragmentation, like we were talking about for Nvidia and Apple, energy bottlenecks that Michael was just talking about on the AI thematic. And there is a slow collapse of legacy business models that haven't really adapted fast enough, Apple. So I think that this isn't just about picking good companies anymore. It's about identifying the few that can survive the AI tsunami that's coming our way, that their boat is it's secure enough to get through that AI tsunami. So I think that you need to ask yourself, like, what themes catch your attention? For me, it's AI infrastructure, agentic computing, new age of defense, space, energy constraints, etc. So then you need to then ask yourself, all right, who becomes a system level dependency and who fades into the commoditization noise? Because I do think the AI tsunami is going to create a lot of companies that are used to have a defensible moat that is going to become a commodity now. And that's why you really need to do some dig deeper in all these companies. Don't base your decisions on traditional metrics like revenue growth, free cash flow margins, net retention rate, etc., because these are based on backward looking numbers or today's reality, when the pieces on the board are changing quickly. You don't know what these numbers are going to be in a couple years. So you have to ask yourself, does this company have scale driven leverage? Is it riding a distribution advantage that compounds with time? Does it benefit from a customer lock-in via ecosystem, infrastructure, embedded intelligence? Is it doing what others can't? Can someone else's code replicate this existing product? And Amazon's an easy example. Like, the moat wasn't just Amazon Prime. It was they turned logistics into a data network and fulfillment into software. That was something that I didn't think was possible. UPS and FedEx didn't think it was possible. Another thing, Tesla. Power wasn't just in EVs. It was in vertically integrated hardware. So like battery, supply chains, real-time software updates. Like, it's giving it agility that no OEM can replicate. Or last one, I mean, is Palantir. Like, the product isn't just AI, it's orchestration. AIP isn't just the most successful product in the AI era that got launched. It's embedding Palantir into a company's operating system, not just as a vendor, as the OS for them, that they cannot take an operating system out of their organization anytime soon. It's probably going to be living there rent-free permanently. So I think that a lot of these things I'm referencing is how you kind of also build conviction, because there's going to be a moment where, if I'm accurate in the assessment that unemployment is going to triple, I think a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, employment. You have to get really strategic on how to survive in this new world that's forming. Like, it's not going to be, you're going to have a hard time holding positions. You have to build conviction. And in order to build conviction, it's not by chasing what's working now, but understanding what will be optional later. And that's a mentality I think a lot of listeners should have.
Michael, I'll kick it over to you. I mean,
Sure.
you've done this for decades, looking at these companies for an individual investor. Build on what Shai's talking about there.
Sure. I'll stress on 2 points that Shay brought up. Number one is the work required to analyze each company. It's a very complex landscape, as Shay talked about. All of the companies that you mentioned are all beneficiaries. But you also used a word that I used in '93 when I launched my coverage of the internet, when this is 2 years before the Netscape browser, which is tsunami. That there's a tsunami coming, and the core thing from that to today was it took 20 plus years for the internet tsunami to give us everything and all the evolutions, etc. This is a multi-decade tsunami of AI. So that's number one. It's a long-term game. This is like not even a marathon. It's several triathlons. As an investor, recognize that. And there's more change in up and down the tech stack today, even for the established companies, that in 30 years of watching this, I could have told you from 82 to 88, which companies are going to be stable and they're going to be fine, hardware, software, tech stack. This time around, I've been tracking AI. I went back to, get my AI bona fides from UT Austin and Stanford to just learn the matrix math and all this other stuff. What I'm trying to say is this business is changing fundamentally on a bottom-up basis more than any tech wave I've seen. I talked to the researchers at the leading hyperscalers, et cetera. Their heads are spinning. 6 months ago, they thought it was 90% training for the data centers they were building up for hundreds of billion. Today, over 60 to 70% is inference. In about 2 or 3 years, it's going to be 90% inference. What does that mean? It means all the stuff we're talking about, is it Broadcom, is it Qualcomm, is it this, is it Hynix? In the data centers, all the stuff changes when you change the application from a bottom-up point of view. So as a regular investor, even if, me doing this 36 hours a day, I can't keep track of it. So for regular people, this is a hugely gargantuan task. This is why passive investment worked, as Howard would say if he was here, over the last 50 years, last 10 or 20 years, ETFs, et cetera. Even the top VCs are turning into passive investors. You look at Andreessen, you look at all the top VCs. In my day they would only be allowed to invest in one hyperscaler software company, one hardware company, one chip company. Today, they invest in all of them, okay? They've had to change because they know the game has changed. To watch them, they're the earliest canaries in the coal mine. They're diversifying. So why should you and I try to pick one company? Just pick a bunch of them and be adroit on the ETFs. There's more ETFs than there are tech stocks. Be smart on those. Figure out the ones here, figure out the ones in Europe, figure out the ones in China. Understand all the analyses of who's got this and what's the mix of this and who's going to win. And not, if you want to do the short-term trading thing, it's there, but the game has changed. And what my fundamental point is that the technologies are changing so fast that words like commodification, moats, the saturation, which implies maturity of a market, we are 3 to 5 years away from that. One point I will tell you, as someone who launched the internet coverage at Goldman Sachs in '93, and internet was '95, Netscape IPO, which was the ChatGPT moment. Google didn't get founded by two guys in a doctoral program until '98. I didn't meet them until 2000, and they didn't go public till 2004. That is 9 years after the ChatGPT moment. Okay, the Google of our age for the AI world hasn't even started. We haven't seen it yet. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that, and part of it is the technologies have changed so fast, and they're changing so fast. They're changing faster than anything I've seen, and that's why I say everything I've done in my life for 30 years in tech, dress rehearsal. And that's why, by the way, when Johnny Ive and Sam Altman just made their announcement of IO products and the merger, $6.5 billion, Johnny Ive said this, that everything that he's done in his life, and he's done 1,000 times bigger stuff than I have. He said, it just, all of that has just prepared him for today. And he just said that the prototype that they've done, which is top secret, that he gave to Sam, he said it's the best work me and my team have done. Now think about that. I mean, maybe it's hyperbole, but that, he did the iPod, he did the translucent iMac, which, Katie, you're too young to remember. This was a great my Mac with a built-in
I had
modem.
the orange one. Yeah, the Carrie
You had the orange
Bradshaw
one. Orange is my favorite
Yeah,
color.
yeah, I was
no,
there.
but I'm just saying that they had So he's done the iPhone, MacBook, etc., and he's saying that this stuff is just getting started.
Yeah.
So let's believe them on that part.
Yeah.
And this is getting exciting. Nvidia. The only thing I'll say since this call started on Nvidia is Jensen is the one CEO of all the ones I've known, founders, etc., who sees these trends 5 or 10 years, but he then executes. When he was a smaller company and a bigger company, he executes like a startup founder, and he continues to do it 3 decades in. And that I have seen everybody. I'm not dropping names, but Steve Jobs, everybody. I have never seen someone like Jensen ever from an execution point of view. This is not a stock recommendation, but I'm just tell you that is the game that's going on, and the changes. And none of these guys, just like they don't control what happens in DC, they don't control what's happened in the underlying technologies. And the technologies are changing at an exciting. As a technologist, it's oh my God, it's like Christmas every day. But as an investor, it's like oh my God, it's a disaster every day. Got to worry about this. I got to worry about that. So that's why mind the waters if you're investing in individual stocks.
Michael, let me pick your brain about this because you obviously have the wisdom of tech revolutions. I think it took a while for the internet to really take off and be as disruptive to Tsunami. I think this revolution is very different because it's providing intelligence, and intelligence is what replaces a lot. Where back then it was more of an accelerator of technology. This is a replacement. So, do you think that accelerates your timeline of decades, or it might be actually 5 to 70 years?
I hope so. Here's why I don't think it will. I've been writing a daily AI post on Reset to Zero for now. I just crossed my 2-year mark. And I'm going to the weeds about all the things that are different. You're totally right, Shay. The technologies are going crazy. It's just that technologies by themselves don't make markets and don't make amazing products that mainstream people, not the early adopters, really want to use. That takes a long time. For just instance, the Johnny Ive Sam thing that they're talking about, this gizmo that listens to you, records everything, etc. Think about it. They're talking about 100 million units in the next 2 years. I think it's optimistic. But here's why. Because if you and I have 100 million, if we have glasses that are recording all the time with cameras, right? There's a social creepiness thing. People don't want other people to record everything constantly. The killer app for smart glasses is basically the ability to identify anyone that I see in a party or a cocktail party, etc. But guess what? In half the states in America, you cannot legally do that as a product because there's first-party consent laws. The laws, the regulation, there's so much friction. Everyone talks about agent shy, or the agentic, the third of the 5 levels that OpenAI laid out. I have it in my post. Agents today are stuck at the starting gate. Why? Because 99% of the websites go in, have captcha codes. How many times have you tried to do anything, buy anything, and they say, are you a human? Are you a bot? You know how long that's going to take to unravel and undo for agents to go in and fix that? So I agree with you. As a technologist, I get very excited whenever I see a startup. Our agent can do this, and it can do this, and it can do this. I know that. But then I go, hey, guys, slow down. Let's now talk about the reality of the real marketplace, legal systems, ecosystems, people's attitudes. How long does that take to change? Whether it's on the consumer side, on the enterprise side. Especially on the enterprise side, it takes far longer. It always takes longer. Now, having said all that, because of the excitement around AI, everyone is leaning in. 2 years ago, over half the surveys in America, people were terrified about AI. I remember getting a haircut a year and a half ago, and I said I do AI, and my salon person said, "Oh, aren't you scared of AI?" People are terrified. Only now are they beginning to figure out that this thing is good, because we've all watched the Terminator and we got this dystopian universe. My point is, I share your enthusiasm about this wave going to mainstream faster than other curves. That's the good news. There'll be a lot of money to be made in Nvidia and all these other companies. The bad news is just temper yourself, because the adoption of this stuff, and by the way, the creation of the product, using the software to create products always takes years longer. It always takes longer for a whole bunch of reasons, even with all the amazing AI coding tools. And I'm close to the cursors and the replets, and when every CEO like Sundar, et cetera, they come in and say, "Oh yeah, AI is now 30% of our software development." that you can take that number as a general observer and say, oh my God, yeah, we're going to not need software programmers. My nephew Neil just graduated with his master's in computer science. His mother calls me my sister. Oh my God, did we put him in the wrong thing? I go, no, he's going to have more job opportunities as a computer scientist with his grades than anyone in history in other ways, because technology always means we need more of the people you worry about losing jobs, not less. Always, always, always. Take it to the bank. But it takes a while. And so I share your enthusiasm, but remember this is a marathon. Just, when there are the straightaways, just and the downhills, just ramp a little bit. I used to be a runner, so I'm talking a different game. But pace yourself. This is going to be awesome.
You might be right. Maybe I'm just talking like as a 31-year-old excitement, because I think like, oh, maybe this is like, because I feel like the whole conversation was always like the similar, where like going from a horse to a car, from driving to flying. Like people are like, I'm not going in that tube in like thousands of feet in the air. But like eventually, point A to point B, it was too convenient. And I think like this intelligence era we're about to enter, I do think that we're entering an era where intelligence moves off screen, aka agentic AI. And I think Aaron, what John Ives is talking about, that product with OpenAI, reason why I think it's such a potential competitive headwind for the iPhone is interactions in the future will no longer be tap and type. It's going to be more of a sense and respond. That's an inevitability. Nobody knows how long that's going to take to get there. But I think that's why in that world, that future world of sense and respond, traditional operating systems loses its grip, aka Apple, because new interface isn't graphical, it's conversational. And I think that might accelerate AI. But also, you're right, though, a lot of the potential heartburn that's going to cause society, it might prolong this inevitability.
The one thing I just add, because of the Apple point, because I put out a note on Google 2 years ago that they're going to win this AI search, and I just had it post a couple of days ago after I/O. They're hitting the home run. I think Apple's going to be in the same boat. I have the same post from 2 years ago. Everyone thinks they're behind. Apple has so many assets I've talked about. They're the only two companies right now, Google and Apple, that have the ecosystem to deliver to hundreds of millions of people the real product. They're not late. Okay, if I just told you Netscape was 95 and Google didn't start till 98, Apple has the luxury of another 2 years. Don't rush it.
Well, do you think
the
it's
narrative is? No,
do you
sorry,
think,
go ahead.
Do you think it's because of the lack of faith in Cook on innovating, and they just need to fire Cook?
Cook is
next year?
amazing. You couldn't have had Apple without Cook. There's a wonderful book called Apple in China that's written by Tom McGee, who actually has a critical take on Apple because of it. I disagree with him on that, but you should read the book. What Tim did, Steve Jobs, who I had the luxury of meeting him from a business point of view at Goldman in multiple of his careers, Pixar, Apple, Next when he came back, because I was helping Next go public and Apple decided to buy it. And so I've got a little bit of a glimpse on it. And one of the best hires that, everyone talks about Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. Tim Cook went after, Steve Jobs went after Tim Cook in 97. Because Tim Cook was running the biggest supply chain for compact computer, which was the Nvidia of personal computer companies, and Steve Jobs realized he couldn't build his products in the U.S. back then. He got Tim Cook. Tim Cook is the guy who laid the groundwork to make Apple the single best investment Warren Buffett's ever had in his entire career. Okay. That is Tim Cook. It is Steve Jobs, it's Johnny Ive, it's a bunch of other executives that we should also mention. But I'm just saying the current narrative that Tim Cook, and by the way, Tim Cook is at the end of his career, not the beginning. So yes, he needs new blood. I agree with all of those things. But I don't agree with this business of that they're behind, that they don't have any card. They have so many cards to play. In a world if they were in a world without the China issues, they would have bought DeepSeek. And why is that important? Because DeepSeek is the best team, about 200 to 300 people. They're doing open source AI models, AI reasoning, AI agents on the planet with the constraints of, they would have bought 30%. In fact, that's the deal that I would encourage my friends at the Trump administration to negotiate. Let Apple buy 30, 40% or all of DeepSeek, and let us buy the US part of TikTok. That's the deal. Okay, and then settle the whole thing. Why is that important? Because it's for Apple, the value is they got 2 billion people that are using dozens of apps in their ecosystem. AI needs to go from a bottom up. It's not the big models. It's the teeny models. In the devices we'll have in 2 years, we'll have hundreds of small models in this that will run the AI with our data on the phone. We're going from a mainframe to PC moment that took 40 years. That is the thing, Shay, that's going to happen faster. It's not going to take, we are not going to go from mainframe to smartphones in 40 years. We're going to go from mainframes to handhelds in 10 years. It'll be the chips and so on. That is where I'm excited. And Apple, it's even better placed than Google on that. Why? Because Apple controls all of their iPhones. Google only controls 2 to 3% of their iPhones, the Android phones, because the 80% of the Android phones are in Asia. About half of them are in China. There is no Google services on any of them. Google doesn't get benefit of Android on that. So Apple is very uniquely positioned, and this is not a stock recommendation, but from my perspective as an AI analyst, Apple has so much opportunities I can't see straight. So I just, every time it keeps down, I keep adding more. Same, just like Nvidia, not a stock recommendation. Even Tim Cook, he will find the people. They're not. These are very smart people. They know what they have to do. And yes, there are cultural issues, but they'll figure it out. Yes,
we
Katie,
were
I'm
talking
sorry.
about we were talking about this yesterday. So, I mean, that's a really interesting scenario. The deal you outlined doesn't seem too likely, but if it's not DeepSeek they go after, we were talking about this yesterday. If it's M&A, who do you think's a likely target, or do you think they're building?
I put out a piece. Thank you. It's a great question. There's going to be, under the current administration, I think there's more leeway for M&A, large, medium, and small in the U.S., globally, et cetera. The one I talked about with DeepSeek, I only bring it out tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but remember, right now, the Xi government, I guarantee you, Xi government didn't know what DeepSeek was before they launched that model. It was a teeny company. They came out of nowhere. Now they're not allowing their engineers to leave the country.
Wow.
Because now we view them as a national resource, and because we're making such a big deal about AI as a security thing, they're doing the same thing. But Apple, there are only 3 companies that have sway, U.S. tech companies in China with Xi Jinping. Nvidia is one of them. Apple's another. Third one is Tesla, because one of the 3 major gigafactories is in China. Elon is very, very focused on this. And my point is, all this is horse trading. We were talking about the current administration. This is not about national security. These are political points, but there are political points to be negotiated because Trump does want TikTok, because the largest investor in TikTok, is one of his biggest supporters. So there is a deal to be done. And I don't talk about this Apple DeepSeek thing from a political point of view. I say from a technology point of view, because they got the engineers. Those engineers, if you listen to Jensen, if you listen to people, U.S. tech companies, they respect the crap out of the DeepSeek engineers. They're like, because you can read their papers, they're open source. It's like, oh my God, these were really brilliant innovations. By the way, the other major company that came out of China in AI, Manus, one of our top VC companies, invested in the Butterfly Effect, which owns Manus, which is the agent company. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of opportunity. The biggest successes out of venture in China tech, the biggest investors were U.S. investors. And we just, told them all to divest of all of that, under the Biden administration and now here. But that's, again, against our interests. It's the part of the earlier conversation. But in terms of your merger question, yeah. The biggest one that I wrote about recently is because of, Shai's point, hey, that Apple may be behind. I don't rule out a scenario that, Apple ends up buying OpenAI with Johnny Ive in a couple of years when they're actually ready to ramp up the product. It's no different than Apple buying Steve Jobs' Next for $400 million. I was there, part of that thing, because I was about to take Next public, and Jobs comes back.
Do you think Sam becomes CEO of Apple then?
He could be. I don't see why not. Again, those are. I'm just saying that I'm going to put it out there because history rhymes, and there are issues with Johnny Ive and Steve Jobs' wife, Laurene Jobs, is in the press. They're very close. Laureen Jobs and her private entity Emerson is an investor in Johnny Ive's IO products and Love From. So they're now big investors in OpenAI. So yeah, there's a lot of DNA and common history here. So it's not out of the picture. To your point, if they're behind tactically, this is one way. If the devices that Johnny is coming up with, hardware, software, with, by the way, most of them are ex-Apple engineers, right? The top 3 or 4 people that Johnny Ive brought over are the people who did the iPhone, who did the iPad. They're all at OpenAI now. But guess what? OpenAI, and I've written a post about this with the 3 ChatGPT things. OpenAI, Sam Altman has the most extraordinary, crazy job on the planet that I've seen any entrepreneur see. He's got to build not 1, but 4 to 5 world-class companies, because he's building an infrastructure company where he's raising $100 billion now with SoftBank, but $500 billion. He needs to do, he's going up head against Microsoft, against Google and Meta with hundreds of billions. He doesn't have that. He has to raise that. Then he has to, if he's going to do 100 million units, going to 500 million units of this gizmo, guess what? That's going to require $5 to $10 billion at least. Okay, this is the company, even with this valuation of 300 billion, can't be done. They have to raise it, maybe in the public markets. But what I'm saying is Apple is an option. By the way, Google, other people would be interested, but there's more DNA on the Apple side. So I just want to share DNA. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Awesome.
I can go on, but I just want
I love that. I love that perspective. Definitely different. And I love getting pushback on my spiels that my hot takes.
We are actually more in agreement on all of the items. Like on the CUDA stuff, I agree with you on the CUDA. On the China thing, I just think we're pushing them in such a corner they have no choice. And they're half the world market, and they got half the world's engineer. They're graduating more STEM engineers, about 5 times more than we have. They got to put them to work somewhere. This is where they're going. Okay, and if they can go make CUDA alternative, it's going to be one of the crappiest jobs on the planet, but they'll do it. But our guys won't, because they got better things to do.
No, yeah, I mean that's definitely accurate. And maybe my Apple narrative is I've been an Apple bear for quite a couple of years, so maybe I'm just wearing the goggles and I can't see through the clarity. That's absolutely a reality. But we are at the top of the hour, so now
I'm happy to talk you offline on Apple. I'm a deep student of Apple.
You have to come back, Michael. I feel like we need like a part. I love like the Game of Thrones, like
it is
like what could happen. I didn't even cross my mind. Like Shay, what you brought up, like Sam Altman leading Apple. Maybe this is like a big chess game. That's wild. But yeah, you have to come back.
Would love to. Thank you.
And everyone tuning in, of course, we'll be back tomorrow with a full readout of what happens later today. You can follow the earnings call on StockTwits. Obviously, follow Michael. Follow StockTwits for more insights in this space. Thank you so much for hopping on today. This was fantastic.
My pleasure. It's great to see you both. You guys do wonderful work. I'm a big fan. Thank you.